Imagine standing in front of a global audience, ready to address the world, and then they walk out. That's exactly what happened to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the United Nations General Assembly. The stage was set for him to address the world on Israel's stance amidst the ongoing conflicts, but the world had a different plan. Brazil, a prominent UN delegation, led the boycott, refusing to acknowledge Netanyahu's speech. The reason? Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon that led to the untimely deaths of 2 Brazilian teenagers. This wasn't just a simple protest, it was a bold statement against the violence, a cry that reverberated across the globe, shaking the very foundations of the General Assembly. Brazil's criticism of Israel isn't new. Under the administration of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, the country has been vocal about its disapproval of Israel's actions, even going as far as referring to it as the Netanyahu administration in official statements. This boycott, however, took their criticism to a new level, highlighting their stance in the most dramatic way possible. The stage was set for a dramatic UNGA session, but no one could have predicted what happened next. As Netanyahu took the stage, the tension was palpable. The Israeli Prime Minister, a seasoned orator, was about to address the United Nations General Assembly, but this time, the atmosphere was different. The world leaders and diplomats present were not just there to listen, they were there to make a statement. As Netanyahu began his speech, the world leaders were already in a state of anticipation. He pledged to continue the military operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon, despite increasing global calls for a ceasefire. The conflict had already displaced over 118,000 people in Lebanon, and the escalating humanitarian crisis was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet Netanyahu remained firm in his stance, promising to continue the fight against Hezbollah. Then, in a move that stunned the world, diplomats from various countries started to rise from their seats. One by one, they walked out of the assembly, leaving an increasingly empty room for Netanyahu to address. This was not a spontaneous decision. It was a planned and coordinated protest against the ongoing Israeli airstrikes in Lebanon. The Brazilian delegation was among the first to leave, followed by several others. Their departure was a direct response to the Israeli airstrikes that had resulted in the deaths of 2 Brazilian teenagers. The message was clear. They were not just leaving the room, they were boycotting Israel's actions. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's reaction to the walkout was one of surprise. His words echoed in the half-empty room as he continued his address, seemingly unfazed by the diplomatic protest. Yet the impact of the walkout was undeniable. The Prime Minister of Israel was left speaking to an audience that had made their stance clear. They were not in support of his military operations. In the backdrop of this dramatic event, the conflict in Lebanon continued to escalate. Netanyahu's speech and the subsequent walkout highlighted the increasing international concern about the situation. With the world watching, the question that remained was whether this walkout would lead to any substantial change, or if it would merely be a symbolic gesture. The world watched in disbelief as diplomats walked out, leaving Netanyahu addressing an increasingly empty room. The walkout was more than a statement, it was a clear message. The unprecedented diplomatic walkout during Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the United Nations General Assembly reverberated like a shockwave across the globe. It was a clear denouncement of Israel's continued military operations, especially the ongoing airstrikes in Lebanon that have tragically resulted in the displacement of over 118,000 people. The world's reaction was swift and resounding. Countries far and wide voiced their condemnation, and the Brazilian UN delegation, among others, even boycotted Netanyahu's address entirely. This boycott was not just a response to the airstrikes, but also a protest against the deaths of 2 Brazilian teenagers, a tragic testament to the far-reaching consequences of this conflict. This event also cast a renewed spotlight on the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The escalating humanitarian crisis in Lebanon and Gaza has led to mounting calls for peace and intervention from the international community. But the question remains, how will Israel respond to these calls? Meanwhile, Hamas, the Palestinian political organization, has made a strong appeal to world leaders. They urge them to hold Netanyahu accountable for the deaths of over 41,000 civilians, including children and infants, in Gaza and Lebanon. This call for accountability comes amidst accusations of genocide being leveled against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But as the dust settles on this dramatic event, the implications for Israel are becoming increasingly clear. The global community has sent a strong message of disapproval, and Israel now faces an uphill battle to regain its standing and mend strained relationships. As for what comes next, it's difficult to predict. The situation is fluid and the stakes are high. Will this walkout inspire a shift in policy, or will it only serve to deepen the divide? Will there be a push towards resolution, or will the conflict continue to escalate? The world had spoken with a walkout, but what comes next, only time will tell. In the meantime, we'll continue to bring you the latest updates and insights on this ongoing situation. So, stay tuned, stay informed, and remember, the world is watching. Thank you for watching our video. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insightful content. Until next time, take care.